Back in the 70s, somebody transcribed a script conference between George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark. Um, I doubt it was one of the three of them. It was probably tape recorded and someone dictated it. Um, the most interesting part of it now is that when the three of them are discussing the age difference between Indy and his love interest, Marion Ravenwood, and they're just kind of um, shooting back and forth these limits on what's acceptable for her age. And George Lucas starts at 11 when Indy first has an affair with her. And he says it right out, like, he has an affair with her at that age, and then he doesn't see her again for another 10 or 12 years. And it's really only Steven Spielberg, because I think George Lucas says, because now in the present she's 22, and George Lucas or Steven Spielberg says, well, she better be a lot older than 22. And he says, and she better have come on to him or something, so that it's not like, the hero of the piece had an affair with an 11-year-old. And that's clearly what is implied. Because even Marion shouts the line, I was a child, I was in love. And he goes, you know what you were doing. It's a really ugly scene, actually. And, like, since Raiders is my favorite film, I've always kind of had to overcome that one aspect of his character. And it does sort of get whitewashed, and he's now married to Marion, which is kind of weird to me. That he's now married to this woman that he essentially sexualized when she was 11. That's not, I don't know, I mean, that doesn't sit right with me. And there's a lot that doesn't sit right with me about my older, previously most beloved films. And there's a handful of films in my top 5 that really haven't changed throughout the entirety of my adult life, carrying on from my childhood. And it's like Raiders, Terminator 2, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, which I think is relatively safe, right? In terms of, like, kitty touching stuff. Like, there's a lot of, like, the truth community goes into a lot of the occult side and the Dan Aykroyd UFO side of things, but I think on that other side of things, like the Harvey Weinstein side of things, we're safe. Um, and it, so you look at Terminator 2 now, and my biggest issue with that growing up was Ed Furlong's age, because I would have been his age when the movie came out, but the movie was rated R. And so you were stuck in this position of being forced to sneak into that movie. And it was during a time when that was still kind of like more common, and I guess like teehee, like Beavis and Butthead style, just kind of like holding the door open and like, well, who cares, Fuck it. It's like, I want to see Rambo. Whatever. And so I know it was a different time. It was 91, 92, and it kept getting re-released around that time every, maybe once or twice. But it still left you in that position of you either had to sneak into a theater to see it if you were at the age group being targeted in the marketing. When I was seeing the commercials, I'm like, whoa, it looks like a kid your age being swept up in a Terminator adventure, right? In that kind of epic sci-fi adventure, and you're literally being swept along for the ride. And to this day now, I'm still thinking, why does his character have to be that young in an R-rated film? Like, why is the sidekick essentially targeted at an audience that couldn't even get into a PG-13, let alone an R? So that now doesn't sit right with me. And how, no offense to him, but how Ed Furlong turned out post-Terminator. I don't know why his life took that turn and why he didn't have more success. Back to the Future as well. At the time, I thought that Marty, or Michael J. Fox, who was playing Marty, looked too old to be playing an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old, however old he's supposed to be. I think he's supposed to be graduating high school, right? But his relationship to Doc is still strange. And how he kind of hangs around in his basement. And I admit that it was a much more innocent time where it's like, it was perfectly innocent and platonic, and you would be scolded for implying more. It was during a different time where if you said, like, Rick and Morty style, if you implied any sort of Rick and Morty style shenanigans with Doc and Marty, you would be like, oh, you little brat, you little creep. Like, how dare you imply something so hideous about something so innocent? But now it's more like, no, why does Doc Brown have this, like, little boy friend, and that's, like, his only friend? And you know, what is with that strange relationship? I don't know. So I intend this to be the first part. This is like the prologue to a series of pieces I want to do about, can we salvage Hollywood, and was it ever so innocent in the first place, and can we salvage it like post Harvey Weinstein? Like post casting couch revelation. Now that the average person is aware of the casting couch shenanigans and the sort of like backroom shenanigans in Hollywood in order to secure contracts and secure fame, and I wonder if these elements are required or forced by some sort of element that either finances the film, produces the film, in some way makes it happen, that they say, like, just like George Lucas throwing that out in that script conference, when he goes like, well, how about she's like 11? And you go like, why? You know, I like that Spielberg kind of turned to him like, 11? Really? What? Really, George? And then what's with Lawrence Kasdan going like, oh yeah, and Abner's 42. It's a real Lolita thing going on there, you know? It's a real wild scene. You know, and Spielberg's like, well, how about like 15? You know, and George's like, well, 15 is the cutoff where it's no longer interesting. Like, he means interesting as though, like, it gets more interesting the younger she is. And that the older she is, it's no longer quote-unquote interesting. Interesting to whom? Why is that interesting to you, George Lucas? And that's the only implication I could make here based on a script conference that was transcribed on a typewriter. Because you can't go any further in implications than other than the microphone cord these people sort of lay out for themselves. Anyway, I'll do another piece on how elements like this have always been in films, even in our most beloved films, but we sort of just overlook them because of the things about them that we find aspirational, the things about them that we find, you know, personally endearing, like the things that we incorporate into our own identity, things about characters that we brought into our own lives, our own selves. So Indy was a huge, like, aspirational model for me. Like I told you, like, my father died very young, and I used to consider Indy one of those perfect fictional father figures when you're reading as a young boy, that you're like, you know, he's pretty much like the perfect guy. And then you have to look at that one serious, seemingly very well thought out blight on his character. And we have to look at what that says about the Hollywood machine that produced the film in the first place. Take care, everyone.